Ever find yourself searching for that perfect, versatile item, something that just fits into every part of your life and, really lasts? For a lot of people, that hunt often leads them to look at their wrist. And today, we're taking a deep dive into exactly that kind of contender, the Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80. Our mission here is to really unpack a comprehensive review of this watch. We'll explore its pretty fascinating history and sort of pinpoint its unique place, almost understated really, in the Swiss watch world. We're here to pull out the crucial insights for you, the listener, so you can truly get what makes this watch tick and, well, figure out if it's the right fit for your wrist in your life.
Yeah, it's a great mission because Tissot, historically, they've always been brilliant at creating that accessible entry point into, let's face it, the sometimes intimidating world of Swiss watchmaking. And what's really defining about this specific watch, the Gentleman Powermatic 80, is how it just perfectly embodies that whole idea. It delivers genuine quality, real heritage, but without that scary price tag. It's a masterclass in accessible resilience, you could say.
Accessible resilience. I really like that phrase.
Yeah,
Sort of perfectly frames Tissot's whole journey, doesn't it? So, okay, let's kick this off right at the very beginning of that journey. Let's understand how Tissot got to the point of making a watch like the Gentleman. All right, so the Tissot story. It starts way back. We're talking 1853 in Le Locle, Switzerland. Now, for anyone familiar with watchmaking geography, Le Locle isn't just some random town. It's like one of the historical hearts of Swiss horology, a real nerve center. And the brand didn't start in some huge factory. No, it began quite humbly, really, from the home of a father-son team. Charles Félicien Tissot, who was a skilled gold case fitter, and his son, Charles-Émile Tissot, the watchmaker. They started as what's called a comptoir de tablissage.
Right, which essentially means it was a kind of workshop model. They'd source parts from various local specialists and then assemble the watches. It was a really common setup in early Swiss watchmaking, actually. This was sort of before mass industrialization really took over everything, a crucial step.
Okay, I see.
And you have to remember the context here. This period, mid-19th century, it was a massive turning point in Swiss watchmaking history. You had this huge shift happening, moving away from that fragmented cottage industry model towards embracing, well, the Industrial Revolution and its innovations. Tissot was right in the thick of it, playing a pretty significant role, actually. They were among the first to mass-produce pocket watches, for instance, that featured dual time zones. And they did this by leveraging that incredible local network of specialized artisans and suppliers in Le Locle to integrate their production. That early adaptability, it really became a signature of the brand. It helped them survive and succeed later on.
And that innovative spirit, it carried right on into the 20th century, didn't it? Tissot jumped on the emerging trend of wristwatches pretty quickly for both men and women back in the 1910s. They even supplied military watches during World War I. And they weren't afraid to embrace popular styles either, like Art Nouveau and Art Deco. It shows they could adapt aesthetically, too, not just technically. They were leading, not just following trends.
Absolutely. Then the 1920s, that decade, saw Tissot really consolidate things. The company reorganized, became Tissot and Fils SA, and they opened a new factory. This move really solidified their position as a more vertically integrated manufacturer.
Meaning they controlled more of the process.
Exactly. More control over the whole production chain, from sourcing raw components right through to the final assembly. And that was crucial for maintaining quality and efficiency, especially as demand for watches started to grow significantly.
Right, makes sense. Now here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The 1930s merger. They joined forces with Omega, of all brands. That created one of Switzerland's biggest watchmaking groups at the time, SSIH, the Société Suisse pour l'Industrie Horlogère. It wasn't just a business move, was it? It seems like a really strategic alliance.
Oh, absolutely monumental. And that merger, it really set the stage for Tissot's later survival, particularly when you fast forward a few decades to the quartz crisis in the 70s and early 80s. That massive disruption, driven by quartz technology, mainly from Japan, it hit traditional Swiss mechanical watchmakers incredibly hard. Many didn't survive.
Yeah, tough time for the Swiss industry.
A very tough time. But here's where Tissot's story and that earlier merger becomes crucial. To weather that storm, SSIH, which included Tissot and Omega, ended up merging again in 1983. This time it was with Aswag, another huge Swiss conglomerate that was more focused on supplying movements and components, including the movement maker ETA.
Ah, okay, so they pooled resources.
Exactly. This new massive entity became SMH, which eventually got renamed to the Swatch Group. And as many listeners will know, the Swatch Group is now the world's largest watchmaking group. That collective strength, that shared R&D and manufacturing power, it allowed brands like Tissot not just to survive the court's onslaught, but to adapt, regroup, and eventually thrive again. It enabled them to keep innovating and, crucially, to bring features like the ones we'll talk about in The Gentleman to a much, much broader audience than they could have alone.
Wow. So if Tissot's history is really a story of adaptation, strategic partnerships, and sort of navigating these huge industry shifts, how does that foundational resilience, that history, how does it actually inform the creation of a watch like the Gentleman today?
It sounds like they learned to survive by offering real, tangible value. That's precisely it. Tissot carved out its niche, positioning itself as that accessible doorway into Swiss watchmaking. They leveraged the Swatch Group's immense manufacturing capabilities and share innovations like advanced movements to essentially democratize high-quality Swiss watches. The Gentleman, really, in so many ways, is a direct descendant of that entire legacy. It's built on that foundation.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, with that rich history as our backdrop now, let's shift gears and move into the Gentleman's own story, its genesis. The official launch. The first Tissot Gentleman referenced T927, that was back in 2019. And it came out swinging, specification-wise. It had a solid rose gold bezel, which was quite striking, modern 40mm dimensions, Swiss-made automatic movement, all for under $1,500 MSRP. Pretty compelling on paper. But apparently it didn't immediately set the world on fire, buzz-wise. Why do you think that was? Was it the two-tone look, maybe? Or just the relatively simple three-hand style?
Yeah, I think you've touched on it. That initial version, the one with the rose gold bezel, while quite elegant, was perhaps a bit niche. That two-tone aesthetic maybe didn't quite hit the mark for that broad, everyday watch segment Tissot often aims for.
Right, maybe not quite the versatile piece people expected.
Potentially, yeah. The real turning point, I think most would agree, came later that same year, in 2019 still. Tissot expanded the line, crucially, offering an all-steel version, and importantly, this came with a significant price drop. It placed the watch much more competitively in the market, and that's when the Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium really started to gain traction. It became this sort of quiet success story. It brought some fresh momentum back to Tissot, proving they could still deliver a really compelling, affordably priced, do-anything kind of watch.
Ah, okay. So it started as a solid watch, but needed that little tweak, the all-steel option and price adjustment to really hit its stride and find its core identity. That's actually a great example of a brand maybe listening to the market, or at least course-correcting effectively. All right, let's dive into the actual watch itself then, the physical characteristics of the Tissot Gentleman. What's immediately apparent is Tissot's very consistent approach to sizing here. The Gentleman pretty much sticks firmly to a 40mm case diameter across the whole collection. And that's paired with a thickness of around 11.6 millimeters in these classic Powermatic 80 Silicium models. To me, this feels very aligned philosophically with what the Gentleman is trying to be. You know, a versatile, not too flashy daily companion.
Those dimensions are really well judged, I agree. For example, the bezel is nicely rounded. It stops the dial from looking too flat or expansive on the wrist, that saucer-like effect some 40mm watches can have. It creates a much more balanced visual impression. And another detail, maybe subtle, but it makes a difference to how it wears, is the sharp angles on the lugs and where the bracelet end links meet the case. They help the watch kind of hug the wrist nicely without feeling too chunky or awkward.
Okay, now let's talk about the bracelet, because this seems to be where opinions can sometimes diverge a bit. It's typically a matching 3-link bracelet, milled from solid steel, which is good. It tapers slightly, from a 21mm lug width down to 19mm at the clasp. But some people feel those end links make it wear a touch larger than 40mm might suggest, and that the taper could be maybe a bit more pronounced. What's your take on those sort of common gripes?
They're fair points of discussion, definitely. A big part of it comes down to the clasp. It's a butterfly clasp, which gives a very clean, seamless look when closed.
Right, no bulky fold-over part.
Exactly, but the downside is no micro-adjustment holes. None at all.
Yeah.
So you're relying solely on adding or removing full links to get the right fit. And for some wrists, that can be tricky. You might find yourself between link sizes, a bit too loose or a bit too tight.
Yeah, that can be frustrating.
It can. However, to kind of counterbalance that, the bracelet does have a brilliant quick release system, little tabs on the spring bars. This means you can pop the bracelet off and swap it for a different strap, maybe a nice leather strap, literally in seconds, no tools needed. And that completely changes the watch's character, makes it more formal maybe, and can often solve any perceived fit issues too. Makes it incredibly versatile in that sense.
That quick release is a genuinely great feature, especially at this price. Definitely adds value. But yeah, given that the bracelet fit can be a point of contention, I'd absolutely second the advice. If you possibly can, try this watch on in person before you commit. It's like buying shoes online, right? They look perfect, but then they feel totally wrong on your feet. Watches, especially bracelets, can be just like that. So trying on the gentleman feels almost non-negotiable. Okay, moving on from the bracelet to the dial, I've often felt its real strengths, the subtle details, they don't always come across well in photos, especially maybe Tissot's own product shots. Things like the subtle sunray finish on some dials or the way the indices have alternating brushed and polished finishes, they tend to get a bit lost online.
That's very true. Static images often flatten those nuances. The dial's design language itself is incredibly streamlined, though. It really leans into simplicity, and that's ultimately the absolute core of the gentleman's DNA. You typically get these nice silver tone trapezoidal applied indices. They're paired with classic Dauphine hands, which have a decent application of green superluminova for visibility in the dark. And then there's usually a neat white bordered date window sitting quite discreetly over at the 3 o'clock position. It's just a very classic, highly legible layout. Nothing radical, but very well executed.
Yeah, and one detail I personally really appreciate, which I think speaks volumes about its understated character, is how little text there is on the dial.
Yeah.
Tiss seems to have commendably resisted that urge, to plaster the collection name Gentleman right there on the dial face. Instead, you just get the Tissot brand logo and the founding date, 1853, up below 12. And then down at 6, you've got the movement details, Powermatic 80 Silicium, and the small Swiss-made text. Was that a deliberate choice, do you think, to keep it clean?
Oh, it absolutely feels deliberate. That restraint is key to maintaining the watch's sort of humble yet sophisticated character. It avoids clutter. Although it's worth noting on several models, I particularly like it, on the deep emerald green one, you do get an additional pair of fine white crosshair lines that intersect the dial.
Ah, yes, I've seen those.
It's a nice little touch, gives it a bit of a mid-century vibe, maybe, but the majority of the collection goes without that detail, opting for that even cleaner aesthetic. And just circling back to practicality, you also get small luminous pips, little dots of lume, placed just outboard of each hour marker on the chapter ring. That helps with reading the time in low light across the entire collection.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the case, the bracelet, the dial. Let's shift focus now to the engine room, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because the movement, well, that really is one of the main keys to the gentleman's success and reputation, isn't it?
You are absolutely right to highlight the movement. We're talking about the Powermatic 80 caliber here. Now, this isn't just some off-the-shelf movement. It's based on the ETA 2824, which is itself an absolute icon, robust, reliable, used everywhere in Swiss watchmaking for decades. But this is a highly modified version, and this caliber perfectly showcases Tissot's and the Swatch Group's ability to, well, democratize really solid Swiss-made movement quality while keeping the watch comfortably under that $1,000 psychological barrier. It's all about getting serious performance at an accessible price point.
That's a crucial point. But what's the real innovation here? The thing that makes people sit up and take notice, especially for a watch at this price? I'm thinking specifically about that silicium component.
You're spot on. The silicium or silicon, same thing, balance spring. That wasn't just a minor technical tweak. It was a genuinely significant upgrade and a strategic one. Just a few years prior, silicon balance springs were pretty much exclusively found in much higher tier luxury watchmaking. Think Omega's coaxial movements or even Patek Philippe.
Right, very high end.
Very high end. So its inclusion here in a sub-$1,000 Tissot was a big deal. It significantly boosts the watch's accuracy over time. It makes it much more resistant to magnetism, which is a real practical benefit with all the electronics around us, and it undeniably adds huge perceived and actual value to the whole package. Tissot essentially brought a cutting-edge, high-end innovation down to a much more attainable level.
Okay, so high-tech materials. What about the practical day-to-day benefits for the person wearing it? What does it translate to?
Well, for the wearer, the benefits are pretty substantial. The movement operates at a frequency of 3 Hz, which is 21,600 beats per hour. Now, some movements beat faster, but this rate was likely chosen as a balance point. It balances good accuracy with that really impressive 80-hour power reserve.
80 hours, that's more than 3 days.
Exactly. It's genuinely weekend-proof. You can take the watch off on a Friday evening, leave it sitting on your nightstand, and pick it up again on Monday morning, and it'll still be ticking away accurately. No need to reset it. That's incredibly convenient for a daily wear.
Yeah, that is a big plus.
And you can actually see this movement working through the sapphire crystal caseback on the gentleman, though it's worth managing expectations on the finishing. It's quite utilitarian. industrial almost. You won't find fancy polishing or decoration. It clearly reflects the focus on performance and value rather than on being a display piece in itself. It's built to do a job reliably.
It's still pretty fascinating, though, how Tissot managed to pack those high-end features, especially that silicium balance spring, into such an accessibly priced watch. It really does solidify their role as that gateway to serious Swiss watchmaking, making genuine innovation available much more widely. But then, just as the gentleman was kind of hitting its stride, finding its audience, it ran into some unexpected competition, and surprisingly, it came from within Tissot's own ranks, didn't it? The PRX, launched in 2021.
Ah, yes, the PRX. Talk about an instant sensation. It just exploded onto the scene. It's a much bolder watch visually. Flashier, maybe. It's got that very distinct 70s style integrated bracelet design. It almost immediately became a darling of the watch community online, blogs, YouTube, everywhere.
Yeah, you saw it everywhere.
You really did. Its design inevitably drew comparisons to some major icons like the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. And crucially, it offered that look, plus a Swiss-made automatic movement in some versions, for just a fraction of the price of those luxury icons. It just captured massive attention and carved out a huge new following for Tissot almost overnight.
Which is obviously a massive win for Tissot as a brand.
Right.
But did the PRX's runaway popularity inadvertently cast a shadow over the gentleman? Did it maybe even redefine how people saw the gentleman, pushing it aside a bit? It felt like the PRX quickly became the default, the ubiquitous first proper Swiss watch recommendation, especially for people just getting into the hobby. And as a result, yeah, the Tissot gentleman maybe found itself somewhat relegated, living in the shadow of the PRX's bright spotlight. It even feels like Tissot's own marketing kind of reflects that sometimes. You look at their website, the PRX is often right there, front and center, the gentleman collection. Sometimes it doesn't even make the homepage cut.
That's a fair observation. The marketing muscle definitely seemed to shift towards the newer, hotter model. It makes sense from a business perspective, chasing the buzz. However, despite that internal competition and maybe even the brand's own apparent sense of favoritism, you still find a great many collectors and enthusiasts who loudly and proudly champion the gentleman.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They specifically love it for its low-key looks, its more traditional design. They appreciate the undeniable quality of the build, the great movement, and of course, that remarkably reasonable price point. It really speaks to the enduring appeal of something that's just quietly reliable, understated competence. The gentleman definitely continues to find its dedicated audience who value that classic, versatile aesthetic over the flashier trend.
Okay, so after 6 years out there, facing down market shifts, fads, even stiff competition from its own sibling,
Right.
we circle back to our core question. Is the Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 still the best everyday watch in its class? Or maybe one of the best?
Well, look, purely in terms of sheer bang for your buck value, I'd say there are still relatively few watches out there that offer quite the same complete package. And honestly, many of the closest competitors are probably also from Tissot, maybe different variations of the PRX or other models in their lineup. They're very strong in this segment. But the Gentleman specifically, it offers this kind of understated reliability. And that's something that feels increasingly rare, maybe even valuable, in a world that's often obsessed with the next big thing, the next hype watch.
Yeah, I get that. It might not be the flashiest piece you'll ever see. And sure, the market is absolutely flooded with simple three-hand watches with a date function. You're definitely not short on choice there. But I think its real charm, its enduring appeal is exactly that. It's like a true gentleman. Perhaps it remains humble, steadfast,
Right.
reliable, gets the job done without needing to shout about it. And all that, still, for retail price, often around $875. That specific combination is really, really hard to argue with.
It truly is. For anyone out there who just wants a no-frills, dependable watch, something with genuine Swiss-made credentials that feels well-built, looks good, and is genuinely suitable for just about any occasion, the Gentleman still absolutely fits the bill. It really delivers on that original promise of accessible quality and
Wow.
timeless, enduring design. It hasn't really lost that core appeal.
Well, that brings us toward the end of our deep dive today into the Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80. We've traced its pretty long and storied history, right from that humble comptoir d'établissage in Le Local, through mergers and crises, to its key role within the giant Swatch Group today. We've explored its elegant, functional design, the good points, and maybe the slight quirks like the bracelet sizing. And we've dissected that really innovative, value-packed movement, especially focusing on that game-changing silicium balance spring. We've also looked at how it holds its own, maintaining its identity, even when faced with a breakout star like the PRX from its own stable. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider as we wrap up. In a world where hype can so often overshadow substance, what does it truly mean for a watch, or really for any object we choose to own and live with, to be that humble and steadfast companion? Something that endures beyond fleeting trends and noisy launches. It's definitely something worth pondering, I think. And of course, for anyone whose interest has been piqued and wants to explore the gentleman further, you can always visit tissotwatches.com for all the details.